Trump is dealing another crushing blow to Canada, and this time Prime Minister Mark Carney is walking right into the trap. While the world focuses on other global conflicts, a devastating trade war is unfolding right on America's doorstep, and it's about to get worse. Carney just made his second trip to the White House in 5 months, desperately trying to salvage Canada's crumbling economy. But here's what's really happening. Trump's tariff strategy isn't just working. It's systematically destroying Canadian prosperity while Carney scrambles to keep up.
More complicated maybe than any other agreement we have on trade because, we have natural conflict. We also have mutual love. We have great love for each other. I love this. I love Canada and the people of Canada. And Mark feels the same way about here. The problem we have is that they want a car company and I want a car company, meaning the U.S. wants a car company. And they want steel and we want steel. In other countries, they're very far away. And there's no problem. You can compete and you can do. We don't like to compete because we sort of hurt each other when we compete. And so we have a natural conflict. It's a natural business conflict. Nothing wrong with it. And I think we've come a long way over the last few months, actually, in terms of that relationship. So
what exactly is Trump's endgame? And why is Carney's approach practically guaranteeing Canada's economic collapse? To understand this unfolding disaster, we need to look at how we got here and why every move Carney makes seems to play right into Trump's hands. The numbers tell a brutal story that Canadian officials desperately want to hide. Canada's unemployment rate has skyrocketed to 7.1%, the highest level in 9 years and a massive jump from the start of 2025. But that's just the beginning of the economic carnage Trump's tariffs have unleashed. In July alone, Canada hemorrhaged 40,800 jobs, practically erasing half of June's gains in a single month. The manufacturing sector has been absolutely devastated, losing nearly 10,000 jobs year over year as Trump's steel, aluminum, and auto tariffs bite deeper into Canadian industry. What makes this even more devastating is that Canada was already struggling before Trump's latest tariff escalation. The country's economy actually contracted in the second quarter, and now Trump is preparing to deliver what could be the final blow. New tariffs on softwood lumber among Canada's top exports to the United States. This isn't just economic policy, it's economic warfare, and Canada is losing badly in this economic warfare.
We buy a tremendous amount of furniture off the U.S. and as well as cabinets, but we also ship cabinets down to the U.S. But we can't just keep rolling over to President Trump. As he strengthens his case, we seem to be weakening our case by continuously pulling off tariffs. I'd take a different approach. Try to get a deal. If you can't, we got to hit him back hard and never stop hitting him back hard, because we can never take a back seat to anyone, especially President Trump. We have a great country, resilient country, a powerful economically, we're powerful. The U.S. exports more products to Canada than anywhere in the entire world. And it sounds great with the Americans until they start seeing inflation. We've seen inflation down in the U.S. I just came back from a meeting in Quebec with 2 governors. They're seeing inflation. We're seeing it in sectors. The auto sector, they're going to see an increase of over $107 billion. Other companies are seeing it. John Deere, they're laying over 280 people off because of tariffs. We're seeing it across every single sector. So it's time to sit down, let's get a deal, or let's start hitting back.
About 1,000 steelworkers have already been laid off, with union leaders warning this is just the beginning. Oxford Economics predicts Canada could lose another 140,000 jobs, pushing unemployment into the mid-7% range by year's end. But here's where Trump's strategy gets truly devastating. He's not just targeting individual sectors, he's systematically dismantling Canada's entire economic relationship with the United States. 2 million Canadian jobs depend directly on goods exports to America, and Trump knows exactly how to leverage that dependency. He's raised tariffs on products that don't comply with the US-Mexico-Canada agreement to 35% from 25%. while simultaneously threatening to tear up the entire trade framework that Canada desperately needs to survive. The psychological warfare is just as brutal as the economic damage. Trump has made it clear that he sees Canada as fundamentally inferior in this relationship, describing their trade disputes as natural conflict because they're competing for the same business. But then he adds this twisted element of fake affection, claiming there's great love between the countries while systematically destroying Canadian livelihoods. It's a classic power play. Make your opponent dependent on your approval while demonstrating that approval can be withdrawn at any moment. Carney's response has been nothing short of pathetic capitulation, dressed up as diplomatic strategy. Since becoming prime minister in April, he's made concession after concession, hoping to appease Trump's demands. He dropped Canada's retaliatory tariffs on most U.S. goods, scrapped a digital services tax aimed at American tech companies, and even offered up what conservative leader Pierre Poilievre called a $1 trillion gift, promising massive Canadian private sector investment in the U.S. if Trump would just ease up on the tariffs.
And yesterday, the Prime Minister promised the President that he would increase Canadian investment in the U.S. by $1 trillion if he gets the agreement that he expects to get. Mr. Speaker, in exchange for $1 trillion of job losses in Canada, will he at least get an end to the U.S. auto tariffs that are killing jobs for our workers in Ontario?
We have the best deal in the world with the Americans. First point. Second point, the President of the United States and myself had a meeting of minds yesterday with respect to the future of the steel sector, the aluminum sector, the energy sector in cooperation, which is why our teams are negotiating the terms of those deals. And we are working, as the President himself said in the Oval Office, on the modalities of an auto agreement.
The pattern is clear and devastating. Every time Carney tries to negotiate, Trump takes his concessions and then demands more. In August, Carney announced the removal of most of Canada's retaliatory tariffs, believing this would lead to reciprocal action from the U.S. Instead, Trump responded by threatening even more tariffs on lumber and timber. When Carney promised to be tough with Trump and secure a new economic relationship, Trump simply escalated the pressure. The July deadline for a trade deal came and went with nothing to show for it except more Canadian job losses. What's particularly devastating is how Trump has managed to isolate Canada internationally. While other G7 nations have managed to secure trade deals or exemptions, Canada remains the only major ally still facing the full brunt of Trump's tariff regime. This isn't an accident. It's a deliberate strategy to demonstrate what happens when countries don't fall in line with American demands. Trump is using Canada as an example to the rest of the world. This is what economic subordination looks like. The human cost of Trump's strategy is staggering and growing worse every month. Youth unemployment has spiked to 14.6%, with the employment rate for 15 to 24-year-olds falling to levels not seen since the late 1990s. Manufacturing communities across Canada are being hollowed out as companies either shut down or relocate to avoid Trump's punitive tariffs. The Bank of Canada has warned that growth will take a major hit in coming months as exports fall, prices increase, hiring drops, and layoffs accelerate. But Trump's masterstroke isn't just the economic damage, it's how he's managed to make Carney complicit in Canada's own destruction. Every time Carney shows up at the White House, he legitimizes Trump's approach and signals to the world that Canada is willing to accept subordinate status. The optics are devastating. A Canadian Prime Minister repeatedly traveling to Washington to beg for relief, while Trump holds court like some kind of economic emperor, deciding the fate of his neighbors, while Carney sits quietly beside him.
So a big day, seemingly. I just want to get to a Dominic LeBlanc clip before we get you to weigh in, because he spoke not that long ago, because after the closed-door meetings, Dominic LeBlanc spoke with reporters, and here's what he had to say about those meetings and what is going to happen next.
The conversation, as I said, was more detailed than previous discussions. It concluded with the President and the Prime Minister directing us, me and my colleagues and the President, his cabinet secretaries who were there, to continue the conversation and to quickly land deals that will bring, we think, greater certainty in areas where the principal areas would be steel and aluminum and energy.
Okay, Katie, no deal, but more talks. What's the latest from on the ground there in Washington, D.C.?
It is our understanding that Dominic LeBlanc, I believe, David, you've been reporting that he is going to be staying for further talks and the conversations are going to continue. It sort of has the same sentiment, the same feeling as after the meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump after the G7 in Kananaskis. Remember when Mark Carney walked out and said, listen, we're aiming to reach a deal within 30 days. And he said that a deal or a deadline will focus the mind. Well, now Dominic LeBlanc says, look,
The latest White House meeting perfectly encapsulates this dynamic. Trump made vague promises that Canada will walk away very happy and that Americans would treat Canada fairly. But he offered no concrete concessions. Instead, he used the opportunity to reinforce his dominance, describing the relationship as one where we have natural conflict because both countries want to make cars, but America has this massive market as leverage.
Mr. President, will Canada be leaving empty-handed, or will will Mr. Carney be leaving Washington with a deal on tariffs?
I think they're going to be very happy. We have a lot of things that we're working on that people don't talk about. They talk about, competitiveness. She's a very competitive person. And they talk about things that we don't necessarily agree on. But I think they're going to walk away very happy. I think so.
Mr. President, on all your trade deals that you've signed, there's been a minimum tariff that countries have got. When USMCA gets renegotiated, do you want a minimum tariff on goods between Canada and the U.S.?
Well, we're going to have tariffs between Canada and, they have them with us. I will say with our farmers, as you know, they went up to as much as 400%. 250, 300, and even one at 401. We found one having to do with a very small product, but it was high. So we've always had tariffs between the two of us, and actually Canada was charging us very high tariffs on our agricultural things, a lot of our agricultural product, and that's one of the things that we talk about for bringing that down. So this is a mutual thing, but we've been charged tariffs. Look. We're the king of being screwed by tariffs, just so you understand. And I'm not talking about with Canada, I'm talking about with countries all over the world. When you look at Europe, when you look at China.
It was a public humiliation disguised as diplomacy. What makes Carney's approach even more tragic is that it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Trump's objectives. Carney keeps trying to find win-win solutions and mutually beneficial arrangements, believing that rational economic arguments will eventually prevail. But Trump isn't interested in rational economics. He's interested in demonstrating American dominance and using economic leverage to extract political concessions. Every Canadian job lost is a victory in Trump's playbook because it increases Canada's desperation. The structural problems go even deeper than immediate job losses. Trump's tariffs are forcing Canadian companies to fundamentally restructure their operations, often in ways that make them permanently less competitive. Supply chains that took decades to build are being dismantled in months. Companies are relocating production facilities, research and development operations, and headquarters functions to avoid tariff exposure. This isn't just temporary economic disruption, it's the systematic dismantling of Canadian industrial capacity. Meanwhile, Trump is using the revenue from these tariffs to strengthen American manufacturing and reduce dependence on foreign suppliers. The Tax Foundation estimates that Trump's tariffs amount to nearly $1,300 per U.S. household in additional costs. But Trump frames this as Americans investing in their own economic independence. It's a brutal but effective strategy. Force other countries to pay for American industrial renewal while weakening their own competitive position. The timing of Trump's escalation is particularly devastating for Canada. The country was just beginning to recover from previous economic challenges when the trade war hit. Unemployment had started to decline, reaching 6.6% in January and February, and employment growth was strengthening. But Trump's tariffs killed that momentum before it could build into sustained recovery. Now Canada faces the prospect of entering a recession just as other major economies are stabilizing. Carney's latest industrial strategy announcement reveals just how desperate the situation has become. He's unveiled billions in new spending for retraining workers, helping tariff-hit businesses, and implementing a Buy Canadian policy, essentially admitting that Canada can no longer compete in open markets and must resort to protectionist measures. The Liberal government's Regional Tariff Response Initiative has been increased from $450 million to $1 billion, a massive expansion that signals just how severe the economic damage has become. But here's the cruel irony: even Canada's retaliatory measures play into Trump's broader strategy. When Canada imposes counter tariffs on American goods, it raises prices for Canadian consumers and businesses, further weakening the Canadian economy. It's a lose-lose situation that Trump has carefully engineered. Canada either accepts economic subordination or inflicts additional damage on itself through retaliation. The political implications are equally devastating for Carney. He won election in April, promising to be tough with Trump and secure a new economic relationship with the United States. Instead, he's presided over massive job losses, economic contraction, and a series of humiliating diplomatic failures. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has seized on this weakness, characterizing Carney's approach as pathetic capitulation and arguing that he's gotten absolutely nothing done while Canadians lose their jobs.
Shortly after promising to negotiate a win, to have a deal by July the 21st, the Prime Minister's not flying all the way to Washington, D.C. just to have lunch. By the sounds of it, that's all they are going to accomplish, Mr. Speaker. We've seen since he promised this win, American tariffs on Canada have doubled. The Prime Minister has caved on counter tariffs, on the digital services tax, and on everything else, and 86,000 Canadians have lost their jobs as a result of his weakness. Surely the Prime Minister will finally keep his promise and come home with a win. What will it be?
The Honourable Minister responsible for Canada-US trade.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is currently in the best position of any major trading ally of the United States. But we've said consistently, Mr. Speaker, that we have work to do with our American partners on.
The broader strategic implications extend far beyond economics. Trump is using the Canada relationship to demonstrate to other potential adversaries what American economic dominance looks like in practice. China, Mexico, and European allies are all watching how easily Trump can bring a close ally to heel through economic pressure alone. It's a preview of what they might face if they don't align with American interests. What's particularly insidious is how Trump has an edge to make Canada's economic dependence on the United States seem like a favor rather than a vulnerability. He regularly emphasizes that Canada has the best deal with the Americans and that most products are still being sold into the U.S. tariff-free, framing his selective punishment as generous restraint. It's psychological manipulation on a national scale, making the victim grateful for partial mercy while the punishment continues. The long-term consequences for Canada could be permanent. Once supply chains are disrupted and companies relocate, they rarely return even if trade disputes are eventually resolved. The institutional knowledge, skilled workforce, and industrial infrastructure that took generations to build can be destroyed in months but take decades to rebuild. Trump understands this dynamic and is using it to permanently weaken Canada's competitive position. Looking ahead, there's little reason for optimism about Canada's prospects. Trump has made it clear that he sees the upcoming 2026 review of the USMCA trade agreement as an opportunity for further concessions rather than mutual benefit. He's already floating the possibility of bilateral deals instead of the trilateral framework, which would give him even more leverage over individual countries. For Canada, this represents an existential threat to the trade relationship that underpins its entire economy. The human stories behind these statistics are heartbreaking. Families across Canada are facing unemployment, reduced hours, and uncertain futures as Trump's trade war destroys their livelihoods. Communities built around manufacturing, resource extraction, and export industries are being systematically hollowed out. Young Canadians are seeing their career prospects evaporate as companies either shut down or relocate to avoid tariff exposure. Carney's upcoming negotiations face an impossible dynamic. Every concession he makes will be pocketed by Trump, who will then demand additional concessions as proof of Canada's commitment to the relationship. Every attempt to stand firm will be met with escalated economic pressure that Canada simply cannot afford to absorb. It's a classic coercive negotiation where one side holds all the leverage and the other side has no good options. The international community is watching this systematic destruction of the Canada-US relationship with a mixture of horror and calculation. America's allies are learning that geographic proximity, cultural similarity, and historical friendship provide no protection from Trump's economic nationalism. The message is clear: align with American interests completely or face economic consequences that could destroy your prosperity. Trump's tariff war against Canada represents more than just a trade dispute. It's a demonstration of how economic dominance can be weaponized to extract political submission. Carney's repeated trips to Washington, his series of unreciprocated concessions, and his inability to secure meaningful relief for Canadian workers all serve Trump's broader narrative about American superiority and the futility of resistance. As Canada's economy continues to deteriorate under the weight of Trump's tariffs, the fundamental question isn't whether Carney can negotiate a better deal. It's whether Canada can maintain any semblance of economic sovereignty in the face of determined American pressure. The answer, based on current trends, appears to be no. Trump's strategy is working exactly as intended, and Carney's approach is accelerating Canada's descent into economic subordination. The tragedy is that this outcome was entirely predictable and possibly preventable. But Carney chose appeasement over resistance, hoping that reasonable concessions would lead to reasonable compromises. Instead, he's learned the hard way that Trump views concessions as weakness and weakness as an invitation for further pressure. Canada is paying the price for that miscalculation with its prosperity, its sovereignty, and its future.